you. Hello. Welcome to the USC Department of Regulatory and Quality Sciences virtual information session. Next slide, please. My name is Eunjoo Pacifici, and I am the chair of Regulatory and Quality Sciences in USC School of Pharmacy. I am accompanied today by Professor Terry Church, who teaches in both our graduate and undergraduate courses, and also co-directs our undergraduate program. We are delighted to introduce you to the discipline of regulatory science and the career opportunities it could provide. During this introductory session, you will learn a bit about regulatory areas from a few of our faculty, starting with Professor Church, who will talk about how dietary supplements like vitamins and herbal medicines are regulated. Professor Pire-Smerkanich will then give a brief overview of clinical trials and how vaccines are regulated, both very topical during this period of global pandemic. Professor Ko, who directs our consulting center, will describe how our students can gain experience of working on regulatory projects to prepare them for careers in industry. Kristen Felthousen, our program administrator, will then describe the application process for joining our program. We also have a few of our current students joining us today to share with you their perspectives and experiences. We will leave some time at the end for Q&A and further discussion. So you might ask yourself, what is regulatory science? Many of you may have never heard of the term. Regulatory science is a new discipline that converges science, law, and business. Specifically, regulatory science relates the regulatory and legal requirements of biomedical product development, food, and dietary supplements to the scientific research needed to ensure the safety and efficacy of these products. So it goes almost without saying during this time of COVID-19 pandemic that regulatory science is all around us. From our concerns regarding accuracy of diagnostics, to our hopes for safe and effective medicines and vaccines, regulatory science also impacts everyday products that we use and wear, the food that we consume, and even the products that we use to care for our animals. And underneath some of these headlines that we have seen lately, like the development of vaccines and off-label use of drugs, are regulatory concepts regarding the importance of clearly demonstrating safety and efficacy of products before they become widely available. In our educational program, we focus primarily on products that are regulated by the FDA, Food and Drug Administration. It turns out this is quite a large sector. The sales of these products amount to nearly $2.6 trillion per year and represent over 20 cents of every dollar spent by American consumers. I'm sure that these products affect all of you. So Professor Church, what are your thoughts on the career opportunities in this field?
Well, thank you, Dr. Pacifici. There is a high demand for talent to work in these specialized fields. And for example, you can see from this US Department of Labor website page that regulatory jobs are almost 1 million positions, of which almost 80,000 are vacant. This was the figure in 2016, so you might wonder where this trend is headed. And here is the 2018 figure, which shows we have crossed the 1 million mark, and the open positions are now over 90,000. The trend is clearly moving up. In fact, we anticipate this trend to continue for at least the next decade. We think this presents a talent crisis in the industry and have recently published our findings on this topic. What educational backgrounds, you may be wondering, do regulatory scientists have? As seen in the data from a recent scope of practice report from RAPS, regulatory science comes with a wide range of academic backgrounds. The vast majority hold a bachelor's degree, and slightly less than half hold a master's degree. But what about the salary? This information was collected by looking at a couple of different websites, PayScale and Glassdoor.com, in multiple states for regulatory and quality related jobs. Looking at the job descriptions, I noted the level of education that was required per position, and then averaged the salaries for BS degrees and also MS degrees. For example, completing a master's in regulatory science could increase your average starting salary by nearly $40,000 with BS alone. Basically, for an additional year of school, you can increase your earning potential substantially. Where do regulatory science professionals end up working? As can be expected, the highest proportion end up in industry itself, but there are other work settings where regulatory scientists find themselves working. For example, academic institutions and consulting firms, CROs, and government, just to name a few. And this career is not just for individuals with science backgrounds, because almost every aspect of the industry is regulated, from manufacturing to marketing. Taking this into account, Dr. Pacifici, would you please walk us through the regulatory science program at USC?
So thank you, Professor Church. So our goal is to guide you to your dream job, with our vision to train the next generation of professionals as leaders in this exciting field by providing a training ground for talented professionals involved in the development and commercialization of regulated products. We offer multiple graduate programs that can be customized to meet your career aspirations, from a doctoral degree in regulatory science to multiple master's programs to meet individual needs, and certificate programs if you would like to enrich your expertise without committing to a full degree program. You can also just take a course or two as a limited student if you want to just check us out. Our courses focus on specific subject areas and are designed to prepare you for the workplace by integrating real-world scenarios, team projects, and communication skills so that you will stand out among your peers. Within our program, you can design a track for yourself to become specialized in a product category. Food and dietary supplements, for example, or drugs and biologics. If medical devices are your area of interest, we have a track for that as well. All our courses can be taken on weekends and during summer semester. During the week, our students conduct research with our faculty on regulatory science topics or work in consulting center to help advance projects to products. And you'll hear a bit more about the consulting center from Dr. Kuo later. We also partner with industry sponsors for an experiential internship program under our TRACS initiative. And if you secure an internship or a full-time position during your studies, as many of our students do, our course schedule allows you to continue your education while you work. Now you will hear from some of our faculty who will share with you their areas of focus, starting with Dr. Church on dietary supplements. Dr. Church, over to you.
Thank you. Again, I want to thank you all for joining us today. I'm Terry Church. It's been my pleasure to be a part of the USC Regulatory Science program for nearly 7 years, 3 of which as faculty, the most recent, and prior to that, 4 years as a doctoral student. I'm going to talk about an up-and-coming field in the world of regulatory science, dietary supplements. Dietary supplements are defined as products that contain a dietary ingredient intended to supplement the human diet. These take the forms often of vitamins, minerals, amino acids, even probiotics. On average, Americans spend $30 billion annually on dietary supplements. 68% of all adults have reported taking dietary supplements, of which the majority are female. Age also plays a role in dietary supplement use and increases after the age 55. People report using dietary supplements for a wide range of reasons. Most report using them to feel better or to help prevent sickness, but a growing number are using them for sports nutrition and for weight management. Well, the top dietary supplements purchased tend to be multivitamins, calcium, and vitamin C and D. A growing number of people are consuming products like fish oils, which claim to aid in a variety of maladies. Unlike drugs, medical products, or medical devices, which have a long time to approval, dietary supplements take anywhere between 30 to 75 days to obtain FDA approval for market release. This pathway is relatively short because dietary supplements are not making medical claims. The FDA views supplements as safe until proven unsafe, whereas they view drugs as unsafe until proven safe. In terms of the economic contribution of dietary supplements to the industry, what we've seen is that dietary supplements have a number of economic impacts throughout the United States. There's a direct impact in terms of economic contribution from the industry, indirect impacts from the industry as they spend on regional suppliers and their employees, and induced impacts due to spending by both the industry and their suppliers. In total, the revenue generated from this industry in taxes alone is nearly $15 billion. In a survey of recent jobs, individuals with master's degree in regulatory science tend to make double the salary of an individual with a bachelor's degree alone. The salaries shown here represent the lowest tier salary for individuals with no experience in the field. Salaries go up exponentially with the number of years in the field across degree type. Next slide, please. The dietary supplement field is projected to grow exponentially. The conservative estimates indicate an $18 million per year annual revenue growth. It is a field seeing a robust and steady annual growth. Next slide, please. I would like to now hand it over to Dr. Pire-Smerkanich, who will walk you through regulatory clinical trials and vaccines.
Hi, everybody. My name is Nancy Pire-Smerkanich, and I'm going to be talking to you today about the interface between clinical research and clinical trials and regulatory science. Throughout my 35-year career in pharma industry, where I worked primarily in the drug development area, I was always considered a generalist, but I have to say my interest always focused more on the clinical aspects of bringing new products to the market. In my past, I had always assumed that I would go to medical school, and I had tracked towards that in my undergraduate career. And be a clinician someday, but that didn't work out. And like many other people, they're faced with having to find a new path, a path that combines the things that you love to do with the skills that you have. And that actually is what led me to regulatory science, which is where I've spent decades. So if you ever find yourself in a similar situation, just know that you need to be true to your interests and what you're good at. So I'd like to take a few minutes to discuss clinical trials with you and how they're regulated, and also, as the other speakers have, talk a little bit about the kind of positions that are available when you're looking at clinical research and regulatory positions within clinical research. And then I'll also be spending a few minutes talking about the COVID-19 pandemic and not only how it impacts clinical trials, which will be throughout, but also looking specifically at vaccines. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see that before we even get into talking about how clinical trials are conducted, it's really important to recognize the challenges of bringing a drug or biological product to the market. And this diagram really illustrates that very well, and we use it a lot in our teaching. So for people who end up chemists and biologists who are focused in the drug discovery area, who have a lot of success in terms of their drug discovery activities, there may be 10,000 compounds generated across the industry. But as you start to study those compounds and how they work, and that means studying them in animals in our preclinical development stage, and then moving into the clinical trials and clinical development stage, you can see that it's like a gauntlet to get through. And that for all those tens of thousands of compounds that you may start off with, you may only end up with getting one product approved through the regulatory system and onto the market. So it's a very challenging area to work in. That also makes it extremely interesting. So next slide, please. So I love word clouds, and as this word cloud shows, there are so many aspects to clinical trials, and it really leads us to the basic question, which is, what exactly is a clinical trial? Well, we're trying to answer questions in clinical trials like other kinds of research. They are specific to health, they are specific to new products or new ways of using old products, and that's also equally important, especially as we look at some of the products that are being used to treat the current pandemic. The most important thing to recognize is that when they are conducted carefully and ethically, they really are the safest and fastest way to get new treatments to the people who need them most and to improve their overall health, not just of our country, but of the world. Next slide, please. So why do we do them? Well, for new products, we really are trying to determine whether the product is safe and effective for people to use. In terms of improvement of medical processes and the way products are used, are there ways that we can develop products that have less side effects, that are easier for patients to use? In the case of over-the-counter products, are they things that people can actually self-diagnose and use? And are they appropriate for the population? Again, there are many treatments that previously were not tested in children that are used in children, and so those studies are now required. And of course, we have to think about categories of special interest like pregnant women. Currently, right now, we do not know whether the COVID vaccines are safe for pregnant women because they were not studied in pregnant women. Next slide, please. So the good news also is clinical trials are having their day in the spotlight. They are certainly in the news, not just for COVID-19, but in mainstream media picks up on news about advances in neurodegenerative diseases and Alzheimer's disease, gene therapy for sickle cell anemia. I mean, all of these are really important public health issues, and certainly ones that get studied significantly in the clinic. Next slide, please. So when we talk about clinical trials, there's a nomenclature that we use, and we refer to clinical trials being conducted in phases. And so you probably have, in fact, heard a lot about this if you've been paying attention to the development of products to help with the pandemic. And the studies are progressive in nature, not just in terms of what they study, but in how many people they study. And we typically start in phase 1 with smaller trials, usually in healthy volunteers, but not always, and progress through increasing both the size of our trials and the kinds of things that we measure. So initially, we're really looking to figure out the effect of the drug product on the body and the effect of the body on the drug product. And those are some basic things that you may have studied in animals, but you need to confirm in humans. We move into our phase 2 and phase 3 trials, which are patient trials of increasing size, where we really figure out what does efficacy mean in that patient population, because it varies from indication to indication. It's after phase 3 that we actually go with our hopefully successful results to our regulatory authorities for approval. And it's in the post-marketing setting, after they've gotten the approval to sell and market products, that we do our phase 4 studies. As you can imagine, there are thousands, tens of thousands, actually hundreds of thousands of clinical trials that take place every year in all of these phases all across the world to study our drugs and our biologics. Next slide, please. And because there are so many trials, this is big business, and that shouldn't surprise anybody. Clinical trial market is expected to grow in the coming years, you know, again, we're talking about $70 billion US by 2027, and this growth comes from all different places. It comes from new and emerging companies with new kinds of products. It looks at increasing occurrence of chronic diseases and how do we treat chronic diseases. How do we treat underserved populations, not just here in the United States, but globally? I'm part of a growing geriatric population. It pains me to call myself geriatric, but over 65 is one of the largest segments of the population right now. And how do we, as older people, process medical products? And of course, clinical trials are globalized. We conduct multi-regional and multinational clinical trials, and we use a lot of technology to do that. And now we actually also have to study the effects of some of that technologies on clinical trials as well. So many different places of growth, many different segments growing, and a lot of money involved. Next slide, please. I thought I would take just a couple of minutes in showing you what kind of jobs are involved when a company actually is developing its products and it's taking a product through those various phases of clinical trials. It takes a lot of people to conduct a clinical trial and conduct multiple clinical trials within an organization. So just a couple of segments that I'd like to focus on is when a sponsor, which is the company developing the product, is putting together a clinical trial, well, what kind of regulatory expertise do they need? Well, they need something that has a corresponding role at the health authorities, which is the role of a regulatory project manager. I'm proud to call myself one. For 30-something years, I still consider myself one. There are regulatory specialists, and we are the people who plan and direct and coordinate all of the activities required to make sure that the company is in compliance with the regulations, with its own standard operating procedures, and that we are working with regulatory authorities to answer their queries, to make sure our clinical trials can get initiated and conducted appropriately, and to manage all of the submissions to those regulatory authorities that go along with that. And part of that also, as you progress through your career, involves strategy and developing strategy, as well as identifying the risks and the opportunities for where you can do your clinical trials and how is that going to impact regulatory filings and eventual regulatory approval in those areas. It's a long process. It's very involved, but it is, as I said, very, very exciting. On the next slide, I'll kind of pivot around to the other area where regulatory is very much needed, which is at the place where these clinical trials are being conducted. So these are at the sites. These are hospitals, these are clinics, these are doctors' offices, these are areas where people are going to get their health care and also to potentially enroll in clinical trials. And they're just like it takes a village at the sponsor side, it takes a village on the site side as well. And we have our principal investigators and some sub-investigators who are physicians. We have our nurses who fill the role of coordinators. We have staff positions that also help with coordination and data management and all of those activities. But we also have regulatory coordinators at the site as well, who are helping to maintain all of the regulatory documentation and the elements that are part of compliance on the part of the site, as well as really managing how that documentation and how that progress is being tracked through various systems. And so that's again a very, very important role. Next slide, please. So let's talk about something that's probably on everybody's mind. It's in the news every single day, which is vaccines. Progress to the next slide, please. So vaccines fall under the category of biologics, and they are regulated very much the same as drugs within the clinical trial space, but their oversight in the United States under the Department of Health and Human Services and the Food and Drug Administration falls in a different center. So we have a Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, but we have a special one for vaccines and blood products and cell therapies, which is the Center for Biologic Evaluation and Research. And within that center are many offices. One, of course, is the Office of Vaccines. So that might be the one you've been hearing or reading a lot about, that Peter Marks is in charge of at CBER. Next slide, please. You've also probably been hearing that the vaccines that are currently being administered across the United States, both the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines, are the subject of something called an emergency use authorization. This is different than a full licensure. We anticipate that both of these companies will be filing for full biological licensing in the coming months. But right now, their products that are being administered under this emergency use authorization umbrella, which allows unapproved products to be used because there is a threat that is out there. And in this case, it's a biological threat in that it's a pandemic. And what you see happening because of the emergency use authorization is that the process is still taking place. There are still clinical trials taking place, but you're seeing that the FDA oversight is taking place in real time, and that the manufacturing scale up is occurring much sooner than it would than if you looked at the traditional timeline, which is on this slide, which shows a very sequential and a very good way to minimize the risk of failure at any point along this journey. Emergency use authorization for these two products has been incredibly successful in that there have not been any major failures along this pathway, and that a lot of the early discovery work had actually taken place prior to this particular SARS-CoV-2 variant. Next slide, please. So we've still got a lot of work taking place in the clinic out there. While there are 2 emergency use authorization vaccines, there are many more in line behind it, some of which are part of Operation Warp Speed, some of which are not. That's all exciting news. And they are currently the topic of many, many clinical trials that are taking place, again, not just here in the United States, but globally. And so that's some really good news because, as you also have been hearing, when there are issues with supplies, and these vaccines take time to manufacture, and they also take time to test and release to make sure they're safe for use in the population, we will need more vaccines. And so the good news is that there are many more vaccines being studied in the clinic. Next slide. One of the ways in which they're being expedited in terms of their clinical trials is, and this is just an example of what a clinical protocol looks like, and this is the one that was the Pfizer protocol that was used to get the data that was required for the emergency use authorization. And instead of there being a separate protocol for phase 1 and phase 2 and phase 3, they actually created a phase 1, 2, 3 combined protocol with adaptive design components in it that allowed for this kind of compressed timeline to be used. In fact, a record-setting timeline and a record-setting number of people who volunteered to be part of these trials in order to expedite that. And I think that's also really important, is to recognize the contributions of the many people who volunteered to be part of not just this clinical trial, but all of those clinical trials that are going on. Next slide. And this is, as I mentioned, not just a US-centric activity. The WHO is monitoring activities around the globe. And just since I wrote these slides, I'm happy to report that the United States is back participating in a program that will support the use and distribution of vaccines globally to areas that do not have the financial resources as some of the European, Asian, and North American countries. And so we are part of the globe, and the only way you get a pandemic under control is that you look at it as something that is occurring around the globe. So I'm very happy to report that we're back in Gavi, which is the Global Access Program for Vaccines. And it's good news so far, and it is directly related to clinical trials and to all those people who are working so hard in that area. So that's what I wanted to say about clinical trials and vaccines. Next slide.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Benson. I'm directing the consulting service in the regulatory science program. I'd like to use a short time to brief you this service. If you have more further interest in this consulting service, please feel free to contact me. Next slide. So the consulting service is unique, it's one of a kind, and I'd like to talk about the 8 unique aspects of this consulting service. Next. It's not for profit. It is for students. All the consultants on the street, they specialize in certain area, and they make their living from consulting in this complex drug development process. But we are here for you. The consulting service is only for students. Next slide. However, we are also a strong consulting practices. We have a wide variety of profound experiences among our faculties and our invited speakers. Dr. Smerkanich, as an example, she just demonstrated her profound experience in the clinical trial arena. And we have other expertise in medical device, dietary supplement, just like Dr. Church mentioned. He introduced the topic for you: chemical drugs and biologics product, quality commercialization, where Dr. Pacifici is an expert. She is one of the early pioneer to commercialize drugs into foreign countries. Early development, regulatory strategies, global regulations. Dr. Pacifici is directing a course to investigate global regulations and find ways to converge these regulations. She's an expert in this area. So this is the second aspect. Our consulting service is established through strong connections. At USC, perhaps you know this already, we consolidate all the clinical research and translational projects into an institute called HCCTSI. Dr. Pacifici is the director under this institute for regulatory knowledge group. USC has famous business school, medical school with a lot of medical research, cancer research, stem cell research. And we have the renowned Viterbi engineering school. All the faculties there, a lot of them have engaged in innovative projects, and they come to us to seek for regulatory consultations. And don't forget, we sit in the biotech beach. LA and San Diego is a hotbed for biomedicine innovations. So we receive a lot of projects from startups. Next. So the fourth aspect, we can offer you a wide spectrum of projects. You may look for internship in a company, but our consulting center provides you all different types of projects. This is a short list of the projects we have this semester. We have a pediatric device, 2 new medical drugs, and 1 repurposed chemical drugs. We're investigating drug pharmacology, and we also engage a neurosurgery protocol. The neurosurgeon is going to investigate a new approach to operate on patients. And our projects are real FDA projects. This semester, we're going to work on 2 submissions, 510K submissions, ID application, all pertains to device. And we also going to work on IND application for drugs. Next. So this consulting service, we have a team working environments. This is so the student will experience the corporate working environment. This semester, we have 17 students. They come from different backgrounds, regulatory science. Some of them are PharmD students. We have 2 biomedical engineering master students. We have several pharmaceutical science graduate students. They all come together like in a corporate environment. Next. So this team working environment will provide an opportunity for students to learn how to work and to succeed in corporate environment. So they experience weekly team meetings, there are several project meetings, and they have to compile progress report, final reports, like you are going to see in a company setting. Next. But our program is not only to provide students to hands-on experiences. We also train students holistically through different projects. We have team meetings, as I mentioned, but we have also weekly seminars where we're going to review and discuss on regulatory articles. And students need to, they are obligated to seek for and to look for news and present on regulatory updates, the news or the trends in the regulatory affairs. Next. So we have the expect we like you like a Snoopy like Charlie Brown, but we care for you, and we care for your success. On the right, you can see our student coordinators from different years. They all now working in industry. Some of them are renowned companies, as you know. And take one example, the student coordinator who just graduated last year, a month ago, she actually had landed on a full-time position in Oasis. This is not only a student-centered service, we care for your success. So next slide, feel free again to contact me. Now I'd like to introduce you, Kristen Felthousen, our director of our student consultation. Director Felthousen.
We're going to discuss the application process for coming into our programs. So when can you apply? Well, you know, the first deadline that's coming up is February 1st. It might be a little tight for some people, but that's for anybody who definitely wants to come in for the summer. That's a domestic student, or it's the first one if you want to apply for fall as an international student. Then the next tier is probably a little bit more doable for most people at this point. And for fall domestic, it's going to be for June 1st. Of course, you're welcome to apply between now and June 1st and not wait until the end of the deadline, as well as for spring international students. And then October 1st is the one following. So what do you need? You need a 3.0 GPA, especially for a bachelor's degree because that's a university requirement, but also on all degrees while you're applying. 2 letters of reference, and it can be from professionals, so it can be from a current or former employer, or current or former faculty also would do great, as long as they understand your achievements and your academic ability or ability to be able to be productive and be able to achieve, as well as a statement of purpose. And this is a one-pager, really. It's not supposed to be something that's 3 to 5 pages long in a dissertation of your life, just something that goes to, you know, your career goals and how this degree is really going to fit in. And then for international students, we've got the TOEFL requirements. Again, these are university requirements. So TOEFL it's 100, and then IELTS is 7 minimum with a minimum of 6 per band, so nothing lower than that. I'm glad to tell you that the GREs are not required, even if some of you have already taken them. You don't have to necessarily add them to your application unless you think it's going to help you have a stronger overall application. And then, of course, we want you to have a resume or CV. These slides are going to be presented to you after this presentation, so you can have the direct link right there on how to apply online. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to me, and I can be reached at the regsci@usc.edu. Thank you very much.
So at this time, I'd like to ask our students to give their feedback to us on their perception of our program. So I'd like to first ask Kristen to join us.
Can you hear me? Okay, great. Hi, everybody. My name is Christian, and I'm still an undergraduate. I'm in my senior year for pharmacology and drug development, and I am also in the progressive degree program for the regulatory science track, and as well as I do research for the regulatory science team for the Plain Language Initiative. And so I'll read this quote that I gave you here is, why regulatory science? It's because as I learned more about the industry, I began to realize how diverse the field is, and there's so many career pathways that you can choose from, and you'll definitely find something that's suitable for you. And just some other stuff I want to talk about is why exactly did I choose that besides the, the breadth and diversity of the field? I feel it really complements my pharmacology and drug development degree well, and just it's really attractive program. It saved a lot of time and effort applying to other places, and you're still you might see professors that you had in undergrad and you interact with them all the way through your master's career as well, which I really like. And other things that really drew me to the field was because now more than ever, people are becoming more aware of what this field is and what it consists of, and the gaps that we still need addressed in this field. For example, with emergency use authorizations or ventilators, masks, vaccines, all of that is a part of this field. And if that interests you, then it's definitely something that's for you. And besides that, we have dietary supplements, like we were saying, food science regulation, international regulation. Really, there's everything that you can imagine in this field. And that's why I like it so much, because through all these courses, you really can find something that fits your interests. And I would say this is the best field you can go in if you're the type of person who's always unsure of what you want to do with your life, because along the way, you'll find a professor, you'll find a course, even like an assignment that really says, this is what I want to do in the future. As far as my favorite course, I would say it's the food regulation and food science course with Dr. Clemens. I really like that course because honestly, and this is true for all of the regulatory science courses, is the professors have so much industry experience. And with other courses, not in this program, but you might have a professor who just uses talks theoretically, and had just slide after slide of just maybe just some abstract content. But I find that the regulatory science program, all the professors really ground it in real life, and they always have a personal experience or a relevant story to share, which never makes class boring. And so that's what I really liked. They just always had something to say that really ties everything together. As far as what I want to do in the future, I would say it's still deciding. You know, I still have a few more courses left in this program, and during that time, I think I'll make my decision of where I want to go. But ideally in the future, I see myself working in like international regulation because I really like the idea of combining this regulatory knowledge with, you know, bridging the gap between what's happening in the US and maybe like different cultures in different countries. That really interests me. And just to talk about a little bit of the research I've been doing, the Plain Language Initiative is something that aims to deal with how we communicate clinical trial results and information to participants in the public, which is really important right now. How can we tell people this vaccine is safe and effective in a manner that's really understandable and comprehensible to them? And that's what this research is about. It's about increasing accessibility to this knowledge. And you know, this clinical research, it's usually limited to people who are really proficient in that scientific language, and this initiative really wants to bridge that gap. And how can we make it accessible for everybody? And so all of these things just tell you about why I love this program and why I think it's just a good fit for anybody. You know, even if you have just a small interest in it, it can grow over time, and eventually you'll see yourself somewhere in this industry in the future.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Christian. And if I could please ask Annie to share her experience as well.
Hi everyone, I hope you guys are having a wonderful morning. My name is Annie Lee. I am a master's candidate in regulatory science, class of 2021. I graduated last May with a bachelor's degree in health and human sciences. I too am in the progressive degree program. And what drawn me to regulatory science was being able to kind of do research as an undergrad for the research team under this department. And I really was able to meld my strengths in reading and English into the scientific world, and being able to meld those two, kind of the interests as well as the ability. I was able to really realize that this is really something that I am passionate about, and I just learned about more career opportunities beyond what one might have their freshman year in college. Sometimes you think of science, you really just think of the clinical careers, or you think of scientific research. No one really thinks about how law and business and science can intersect. So I really enjoyed the introductory to regulatory science class, the 511 class, because that was where I realized patent law was a very big component of regulatory science as well. And similarly to Christian, I do research for the regulatory science team. I look into the inclusion of pediatric representation in clinical trials because, like Dr. Pire-Smerkanich mentioned earlier, is that pediatric populations, there's a lot of ethical concerns of whether or not to include children and kids and adolescents, as well as how does drugs kind of affect their growth as they become from like a neonate all the way to become an adolescent. So all of this, kind of my experience with the department has shown me, is that not only do you get to interact with wonderful faculty and wonderful staff, but in our classes, we really do have everyone from different age ranges, different backgrounds, some like myself and Christian who are from our undergraduate careers and then making the transition over to graduate schooling. We also meet people who have been in industry for 10, 20 years, coming back for their doctorate or coming back for their graduate certificates, and they give us a lot of knowledge and their depth of experiences as well. And I always enjoy interacting with that because you get a real sense of how what you're learning is being applied to the industry as well as academic research. So like Christian said, I definitely agree. If you have an inkling of not sure what you want to do, or have a passion where you're not sure how to meld your humanities and science, this is one way to definitely do it.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Next slide, please. So we would just like to thank you again for joining us today. A couple of things before we switch over to the question and answers. Next slide, please. I would like to really apologize first and foremost about the size of this font. It is very small, and I promise you this is not an eye exam. You will get access to these slides afterwards, and you can take a look at these courses in more detail. What I really wanted to provide you here was just a sampling of what we provide under each of the categories that you've heard about today, including food and dietary supplements. Next slide, please. and a small sampling of our courses offered that are related to drugs and medical products. And finally, an amuse-bouche of our medical devices, which we touched on briefly, but we didn't go into in full detail. But as you can see, we have a number of exciting courses that we offer that really focus in on different areas of expertise within regulatory science. Next slide, please. We hope that you found today's info session helpful. If there are any unanswered questions that you may have, please feel free to check out our website. You can also check out our related media that will be available by clicking on the red link when you get these in person. You can also reach out to any of our faculty or our amazing staff. Any of us would be happy to answer questions and speak more with you about this amazing field that we love called regulatory science. Thank you so much for joining us today. At this time, I will play the moderator and will ask questions of everyone on the panel related to questions that we've received from the audience. So with that being said, the very first question that we received are, what are some electives students can choose from? And I will open this up for anyone to answer.
I can start actually. So one of the complaints, I guess it's a happy complaint, that I hear from our students is that there are too many courses that I would like to take, and I can't choose what courses that I can what choices I should make, and that's a good problem to have. I think that's a first world problem to have. Some of the elective courses are related to international product development. So I teach a course every spring called International Approaches to Medical Product Regulation. And as you heard from our faculty, when a company develops a product, usually it is for the global population. But the United States FDA is just that. The FDA in the United States just has jurisdiction within the borders of the United States. Almost every other country has their own regulatory authority, and the requirements could be similar or could be quite different from the US requirements. And so that opens up this whole area of international arena. So if you're interested in traveling abroad or interacting with professionals from other regions, international product development will provide you with those opportunities. And then some of the other elective courses include medical product reimbursement, which Dr. Ko teaches every year as well. And that is related to how products are paid for. So we always talk about how products get approved, that they can meet the regulatory requirements to get on the market. But then what? Well, a big question is who's going to be paying for those products. And you can't think about it after the product has been approved. You can't be like, well, then what? How do we get this paid for? You have to think about it in parallel with product development. And so the reimbursement strategy becomes really important. Some of our the food and dietary supplement regulatory subjects are also electives. And what else? Dr. Smerkanich, what are some of the electives that you teach?
I teach a course on writing regulatory submissions because I've spent a good part of my adult life doing it. I also teach a course on auditing principles, which reemphasizes the international standards that get applied to our manufacturing, our laboratory, and our clinical practice.
And
I think everything else I teach might be a requirement.
Yes, there are quite a number of required courses as well. In addition to this type of elective courses, we also provide other learning opportunities. Right now, concurrently, in parallel, what's happening right now is that we're hosting a short course, a 2-day course on in vitro diagnostics. And so we have also other regulatory science symposia that we offer on special topics. So you will never run out of things to learn about, courses to take, or seminars to attend.
I think those are all wonderful opportunities for our students, and we need to make sure that they're all available to them, which we do send out quite a few emails, and they come from our administrative office. And these next two questions, speaking of administrative offices, are more geared towards Kristen. So if you don't mind, I'll ask you a couple of questions, Kristen. The first is, does the department assist with job placement or internships?
Okay, so that's a great question. Placement is as if we put you into a position, and that we wish that could all happen for all of us. That's not the way it works. We've got buy-in from the students. So what we have is a great opportunity, which is our alumni and current students and people from the community, the different partnerships that we have that we were discussing earlier with Dr. Kuo. They provide internal job postings, meaning that we only provide them to our students and our alumni on a job board that's only accessible if you have a password and you're a current student or an alumni. We have been seeing a huge uptick recently in terms of postings for jobs as well as internships. I have hosted several information sessions with different businesses in terms of whether it's medical devices or drugs, and they're looking for people for internship positions as well as a permanent placement employment. So we do information sessions a couple times a year, and that's in addition to when we are back on campus eventually, we will have our annual career fair, which we invite employers, and oftentimes we have a lot of alumni that are coming onto campus to recruit our current students. So considering there's such a vacuum and such a need and demand for people within this industry, we have a lot of opportunities provided.
Excellent, thank you. This next question is one that I puzzle over quite frequently myself, and hopefully you can shed some light on it for us, Kristen. Can I switch from a graduate certificate to master's program or vice versa? And is it easier to switch, or should I just apply to one to begin with?
So that's a good question. So yes, you can very easily switch to either direction, but the thing is if you apply for a certificate, because a master's degree is a higher level degree, you have to then apply for the master's also. Now you could apply for both and get the opportunity to do both. Or if you are in a master's program to begin with and you have a life circumstance where things change and you just don't have the time to complete the degree, or perhaps some funding issues, then as long as you meet the requirements of a certificate, which is the 12 units, then we can give you a certificate.
Excellent, thank you. I'll open this one up to the entire speakers board that we have here. Given the current global pandemic, how are classes structured, and how does the program support student mentoring and success virtually? So I can say from my own perspective that we are very good at doing this virtually. We are one of the few programs that started as a virtual program many, many years ago before the rest of the world joined, and we have a lot of experience doing this and keeping our students engaged. We do love having our students in class, but we are also very accommodating to doing it virtually as well. Dr. Pacifici or Dr. Smerkanich or Dr. Kuo, would you like to add to that? Yes, please.
Sure. The reason we have been good at doing this distance teaching modality is because our classes have always been hybrid, and that's because our classrooms are quite diverse. We have students who have just graduated from undergrad program, and then we have also students who are actually working professionals who would like to obtain their advanced degrees. And so for those students, their workplace could very well be on the East Coast or up in Northern California. or somewhere else, sometimes even international, where they cannot attend classes in person. So we have always accommodated those students by streaming our lectures live and including those distance students in group projects and other course activities. So we're quite well versed in that arena, and that's one of the reasons I think when we all had to go on Zoom last March, I can't believe I'm saying this, last March, that our transition was quite seamless. And so we've been doing this for a while, but that is not to say that we don't miss our on-site classroom activities, because we're now 100% distance, but we used to be what's called hybrid. So we would have courses on site where we have students together on site, and then we would include the students who are distance into that classroom setting. So we would have these live discussions, and our students from distance can either join us synchronously or asynchronously. But now it's a little bit different. So we are still looking forward to getting back on site and having our courses take place on site. One of the things I miss very much are the lunches, because our courses are on weekends, and they are what we call executive style, in that they're all-day courses. So unlike the undergrad courses, in which some of us teach, where the classrooms are structured where the lectures are given every week, Monday, Wednesday, or Tuesday, Thursday for a couple of hours. Our courses, our graduate courses, are take place all day on weekends. So not every weekend. So, it's about 40 hours. So you spread them out over the course of the semester, and it ends up being about 5 full day on-site classes. That gets kind of exhausting, but we take such good care of you that we provide you, morning refreshments and lunch on lunch break. We provide you with lunch and afternoon breaks, refreshments and snacks, so that I really, really miss. There's something to be said about sharing meals together, and all of our also regulatory science symposia also provide, food and refreshments. So I kind of miss hanging out with my students and while snacking, hanging out with our faculty. So those are things I think we miss, not only in our program, but just in our lives in general. So so there are, two things. We're looking forward to getting back on site, but number two, we haven't let the pandemic prevent us from helping our students advance their learnings. And in fact, during this pandemic, many of our students have gotten jobs. So Dr. Ko just mentioned one of his students who worked in the consulting center recently got a job in the middle of the pandemic, and we hear that all the time. And in fact, if I could just maybe expand this discussion to include Dr. Ko, because I'd like for him to maybe speak a little bit about the international students in his consulting center. Maybe you can share with us a little bit about how international students gain experience and participate in your consulting center.
Thank you, Dr. Pacifici. Just share my personal observations. So we have international students who came to us, and gradually we have more and more international students came to our program, and they take advantage of the weekend class setting. On weekdays, they can devote it about 10 to 20 hours in the consulting center, and to get these hand-on experiences and to build up their CV. Surprisingly, after 1 or 2 semesters, they have a very impressive CV and a lot of experience under their belts. And so far, we have very good placements for our international students, even though they're on the appearance under disadvantage because their legal status. But maybe that Director Felthousen can share. Our international student has been very successfully finding a job after they graduate.
Mm-hmm. I'd say that during the pandemic, I have signed more CPT applications and CPT extensions than the last year and a half combined. So I think the pandemic has actually worked out incredibly well for our international students in particular.
Excellent. Oh, please, Dr. Pacifici.
Yes, what I was going to say is that to me, what that points to is, as Dr. Church shared with the audience, a couple of his graphs showing the demand, the needed in the regulatory profession. There is a high demand, and what we are seeing is that supply is limited. And so if you are and it's not like you can just put anybody in those positions. You have to have the qualifications. And so if you are qualified and you can demonstrate that you can do the job, there are amazing positions in the industry for you that would fit into your career aspirations and match your interest. And so in one of the slides, there's a link to not only our previous info session, but also some of the testimonials from our recent graduates. And you can see in some of them how their experiences in our program and also their experiences in Dr. Koh's Consulting Center have really directly impacted their ability to secure interesting and rewarding jobs. So back to you, Dr. Church.
Thank you. I do have to say, going back to one of your earlier comments about the snacks, I do miss chocolate in the afternoons with Dr. Smerkanich in her courses. It's always a fun time. We have time for one more question, and I think I will direct this to Dr. Smerkanich, who is a cohort mate of mine. We both went through the doctoral program at the same time. And the question that I would like to direct to you are, what are some tips for students who are working while taking classes?
Yes, well, since I was one of them, as were you, you can probably remember back to, all of this comes back to the kind of stuff you learn in grade school, right? Good study habits, not procrastinating, although I am a procrastinator. I am. I self-admitted. As you've heard mentioned throughout today, we really accommodate a wide variety of students, both full-time students, but also students who are doing this part-time, and recognizing that part-time now can be even more challenging for people because not only may they be working and going to school, but they may also be caring for their families. For their parents, for others, and so we recognize this. I think we all try to be extremely flexible. As Dr. Pacifici mentioned, we only meet 5 days, like 5 Saturdays or Sundays, or a mixture of both, but we give assignments and we have some sessions throughout the semester for both enhancement of learning, but also to make ourselves available to our students. And so I think the other thing is that we all have very open office hours where we are willing to work with students, and if you're having challenges, to give you some very specific and personalized advice on any challenges that you might be facing about working and doing your assignments. I don't think any of us have onerous amounts of reading. I think the most important things is for you to be able to access the recordings that we have for the lectures that you might have missed or that you need reinforcement on, and then having access to our faculty and to our staff.
Definitely. And just to add to that, having the weekend courses makes a world of difference if you're working. You don't necessarily have to take time off to take classes. It is sometimes a grueling pace as you get close to your final, but outside of that, it's very manageable. And in fact, all of the professors are very approachable should you be in a position where you feel like you're being pressured or you have a lot of work responsibilities. I also found that doing regulatory science and doing the coursework had real application to what I was doing in my job. And I found myself applying a lot of what I was practicing in my real world job. And it just made it so much better to be able to combine both of them together.
And I think if Annie, I don't know if Annie and Kristen are still on, but they might have since they're in the midst of it, they may actually have more relevant tips than I might have.
Yeah, so I was gonna say that it definitely took getting used to the all day, because I mean, as an undergrad, you really just have the longest class I've had was 3 hours, and but usually they run down an hour and 20 minutes. But that took a lot of getting used to is the whole day format. But thankfully, the professors usually give you we get like a small breaks in between and a lunch break, so it's definitely still manageable. But the first few times it'll be a little rough.
Yeah, perfectly said. I got the chance before the pandemic to see the class 8 hours in person. I do miss those a lot. It was just nice to be able to know who you're talking to rather than privately Zoom chat. But other than that, I think the transition over has been very smooth. Not many differences other than, you know, having to sit in front of your computer a little bit more often, but with the breaks provided by the faculty, definitely doable.
Annie and Kristen, did you guys want to comment on assignments and deliverables?
Yeah, I will say that it's definitely, like, I came into it thinking it would be like individual work or something like that, but it's really heavily group work based, which I also had to get used to, because some undergraduate assignments are, you know, write this essay, write this paper, but the master's program really gets you used to working in teams and groups, which I think is good, because I would say I didn't get that much experience with that, or much positive experience with that in my undergrad. So as far as that, I think it's given me good practice into how like a team might operate in the industry or something.
Excellent.
Exactly. And if I could just add to that, you know, group work is always challenging, and everybody knows that you feel like maybe you did more work than your classmates or your group mates. And but it's really analogous to the environment in your workplace. So I like to say, no matter how smart you are, you could be the smartest person in the whole world, but no one person can discover a drug, take it through animal testing and clinical trials, manufacture it, scale it up, and commercialize it by themselves. And so if you cannot be an effective team member and have demonstrable leadership skills, you are not going to be successful. And so that is one of the reasons why we do emphasize group work and teamwork in our classes, because when you go to your workplace, you will also already be familiar with that. In fact, I remember one particular student who had kind of a difficult time in classroom, because exactly what I said, she always felt like her teammates were, you know, kind of slackers, and she also, you know, felt like she had to put in extra work. Well, a few years after she graduated, she contacted me and she said that is exactly the way it is in her workplace, and she really was grateful that she had that experience during her studies. So I thought that was kind of funny, but I hear similar kind of conversations all the time.
Excellent. Well, thank you all very much. I'd like to thank all of our speakers today for sharing their expertise. I'd like to thank our students for also sharing their expertise and their experiences with us. I'd like to thank everyone who's behind the scenes, who didn't get on the camera today, who made this possible for us all. And most of all, thank you for attending. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out. We're happy to answer any questions you may have.